Welcome to Move Like This, brought to you by the Accounting Move Project and sponsored by Moss Adams and Sapro. On this podcast, we share ideas and hear from guests about how they find, retain, develop, and advance women and other underrepresented groups in their accounting firms. Now, on to our guest. Hello, and welcome to this new episode of Move Like This. I am happy today to be talking to Amy Yip. She is a keynote speaker and author, and someone that I recently attended one of her presentations at the Accounting and Financial Women's Alliance conference. So thank you so much for being here today, Amy.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
I'm excited about this conversation. As I said, I recently attended your session at the Women Who Count conference in Hilton Head. And this is that conference I've now gone 3 years in a row. And it is always a wonderful, supportive group of women and excellent speakers. And your session was entitled Stop Saying Yes to Everything and Start Asking for What You Want, which I'm like, okay, I need that. So that was one of the first ones I signed up for. And I promise we'll get into the content of that session here in a minute. But before we do, I would just love for you to share a bit about yourself and how you got into this work and what it is that you do on a daily basis.
Yeah. Thank you again for bringing me here. It's an honor. And so I want to share a little about myself and how I got into this work. So in January of 2020, I was working at Google. I sold all my belongings. I left my job, and with my husband, we took a one-way flight to Ghana to volunteer at a breast cancer nonprofit. And we had always dreamed of doing this. Our plan was we would volunteer for a few months and then go and travel the world before we settled down. And then that little thing called COVID came along, right? And so borders in Ghana closed. And when they finally opened 7 months later, we started living. I wouldn't call it traveling. We did start traveling, living and working nomadically and doing a little bit of travel along the way. And oftentimes, whenever people hear this story, they would say things like, "Oh my gosh, that is so cool." And I wish I had the courage to do that. And I've always wanted to do that. But and there's always this but, right? But I can't do it because I'm at a pivotal point in my own career, or I'm the breadwinner for my family, or, whatever that is. And I always tell people, I promise you, I'm no more courageous than anybody out there because I had a lot of those shoulds. And many of us are very familiar with all of the shoulds of the world telling us who we should or shouldn't be, what we should or shouldn't do with our lives. And so when I was at Google, I was in my mid 30s, and everyone had an opinion about what I should or shouldn't do. For one, I'm at Google. So they're like, why would you leave? Are you bananas? Right? Why would you should just stay at Google and like settle down. And the biggest should at that time was that everybody had an opinion about my fertility.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone said, you're getting old. Someone told me your eggs are rotting. And they said, you should just, yes, someone said that to me. So they said, you should just settle down, have kids, because if you're hoping to have kids, you really got to do it now. One of the great perks at Google is that they pay for your IVF.
Mm-hmm.
So my husband and I, we decided we're going to freeze our embryos, and that's going to be our safety net. We'll go off and travel, and when we come back, we'll have embryos to use. So that's what we did. But then a year later, we found out the tank where our embryos were stored lost temperature control. So they essentially did not know the viability, and they're like, until you use it, we can't tell you. We can't test it. You've got to just use it and see. And that was my rock bottom point of like, oh my gosh, this was my plan. And now I'm even older. And what do I do with my life? Do I go pursue this dream of mine that I've always had? Or do I settle down and start a family? And there was honestly a bit of shame and guilt tied to it too, because on the outside, everything looked wonderful. I had a wonderful job, had a wonderful company, had a wonderful husband, great family and friends. What do I have to be unhappy about? Right. But there was a part of me that was like, this just doesn't feel right for me, but I don't know what is. And so I started doing a lot of soul searching. And the first thing I did because of that shame and guilt was I'm going to read books and I'll figure it out on myself by myself because, I can't tell anybody that I'm unhappy. And so I started reading books. Books did not give me the answer to do I go pursue my dream or do I settle down? Uh, and so my best friend told me about ayahuasca. And if you don't know what ayahuasca is, for those listening, ayahuasca is essentially a medicinal plant. And there's a shaman, there's an entire ceremony, and it's done in Peru. And so she's like, my best friend said to me, there's this thing, it's called ayahuasca. It gives you clarity. And I'm like, that's what I need, clarity. So I took a 5-day ayahuasca ceremony trip down in Peru. I got a lot of clarity on a lot of things in life. If you had met me back then, I would not be sharing any of this with you because I used to be armored up and I would not share anything vulnerable, right? So I learned a lot about what really matters in life and how to show up in the world, but I didn't get the answer of do I go pursue my dreams to travel the world and give back to women, or do I settle down and start a family? And when I returned back to the US, a coworker told me about coaching. And I was so skeptical. I'm like, how could somebody who doesn't know me help me figure out the answers? Like, doesn't make sense.
Mm.
But I was feeling that time ticking. So I hired a coach, and it was the best thing that ever happened. She helped me realize two things. One, I'm not in control of very much. Even if I decided to start a family, I'm not in control of whether I can actually have kids or not.
Mhm.
Right. But I am in control of if I pursue my dreams. So I decided, all right, I'm gonna go and pursue my dreams. I'm gonna leave my job and I'm gonna go do that thing. The second thing she helped me to realize is I want to help people the way she helped me, especially women, because it sucked feeling stuck for such a long time, feeling like I had nobody to talk to, feeling like I didn't know the answers and I had no idea how to get to the answers. And so that was when I went back for my coaching certification. I started studying a lot of like the somatic work that we used in that session, and I went off and decided I'm going to be a coach. And that was the beginning of my journey into what I do today. And, people do often wonder, like, well, did you ever have kids? Did the embryos work out? And I will tell you, while stuck overseas, I turned 40 and I turned to my husband and I'm like, well, according to everybody else, we're old and we should start trying. It's supposed to take a long time. We'll probably have to try for at least a year and then we'll figure out what happens next. And so we did end up getting pregnant. So we tried for 2 months. We got pregnant with our little boy and came home to the US and had my first son back in 2022 and then tried all the embryos. They all failed. And I was like, all right, my body can't take this anymore. I just need a break. And the very next month, I got pregnant with my uh, son who just turned 4 months yesterday. So uh, that's my journey to where I am today, what I do. And honestly, like I want people to live, especially women, to live their own terms and not live by these shoulds of other people and live in fear.
I love so many things about that story. And yeah, as somebody who was, I also had a geriatric pregnancy, as they were referred to, and I'm like, really? I was 39 at the time,
Uh-huh.
and it did not work out for me. I lost twins at 23 and 24 weeks, and so it's like, and I look back on that and go, all right, that's life will throw you some curveballs for sure. And I do love the idea that, you know what, you can't, there's very little you can control. I mean, I don't like that idea, but I agree with that. There have been
Yeah,
so many times in my life when I felt like things happened to me and you can choose A or B and
yeah,
you just have to go one direction or the other. There's not a right decision, but
yeah,
I've also very much experienced the people telling you what you need to do
yeah,
because they think they know what you need to do, or maybe it's what they would choose to do.
yeah.
And I don't think anybody knows your soul anywhere near like you do, obviously. So I love so much of that. Well, one of the reasons that I wanted to attend your session was that I know I can be a people pleaser. I like most women.
Mhm.
And certainly those in my age range, I think those of us that are in our 40s and 50s, kind of, we were raised that way, and as much as we want to feel independent and think that we are, I think there's still this like innate need on some level to take care of people and please others. So, um, and in that session, what I found interesting is that a decent amount of the hour, you asked us to walk around the room and find a person that we didn't know. Then we were given a few exercises to do with this person, including asking them for something and turning them down for something that they asked for. And I mean, all of this is obviously somewhat manufactured. But I was surprised by how uncomfortable I was in a situation where I was kind of having to say no to somebody for something that was not even real. So, what led you to discover this way of teaching this concept? And what feedback do you frequently hear from attendees that of your sessions?
Yeah. Um, so first, I mentioned earlier, I studied somatics. And for those who don't know what somatics is essentially your body in its wholeness, right? We have the skin and the bones, and that's like the medical body. And then there's the body in its wholeness, which is we have a thinking self, we have a habitual self, an acting self, a sensing self, and all of those selves make us who we are. And so somatics is around becoming aware of what is happening with all of those selves, right? And when you think about it, when someone says, I want to say no more often, they know they want to say no. And no is a two-letter word. We can all do it. So what gets in the way? And so when I started studying somatics, what I realized is our bodies are so important when it comes to change and transformation. And most of us are so out of touch with our bodies that we don't even notice what is happening. Like when I get angry, oh my gosh, my heart is doing this and my body starts doing this and I heat up and like all these sensations are happening in the body. And it's the same thing with saying no. So when I was in my coaching school learning somatics, we would constantly be doing what we called practices. And my teacher used to always say, you're always practicing something every single day, right? Whether you're doing one thing or another, you're practicing it. And you have to become aware of what am I practicing and what do I want to become and what do I need to practice to become the thing. And so I started noticing for a lot of my coaching clients, they wanted to say no, and yet they kept saying yes. And so what I realized was they're practicing saying yes every single day. And it's kind of like riding a bike. For the first time you ride a bike, right? You fumble, you fall off, it feels uncomfortable, but by the 100th, thousandth time you're doing it, your body just remembers. And so what I realized is, oh, what we're doing is like we've ridden that yes bike 1,000 times, and it just becomes this automatic thing that comes out. And the no is like riding the bike for the very first time, and it's uncomfortable. We're going to fall off the bike. And so, how do we start practicing that? And I realized that even with myself, like I had my husband be my accountability partner because he knew I sucked saying no. I sucked at asking for what I want. Like he would ask me, "What do you want for dinner?" And I'm like, "Oh, whatever you want." I'm happy doing whatever I could not express my own needs. And so he was my accountability partner, helping me to just practice. And I knew he was a safe person, right? But yet I still felt that discomfort in my body. So then that's how I came up with like, oh, like we can actually practice this even in a safe place with safe people, even in a like what you call a manufactured situation, and those same sensations still show up. And you had asked like, what do I frequently hear from attendees of the session? At the end, they are like, oh, I thought it would just be easy because I knew it was just like a made up situation. But yet I am so shocked that my body still went into this like discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was visceral in a way.
Yeah.
it's funny because I mean I run a business and but I do think that we are you're right. It's so ingrained in us to play nice, to take care of others, to be kind or whatever we've heard from our mothers and grandmothers and aunts and friends
Yeah.
forever. And I think saying no is often equated with being bad or being, I can't think of the right word necessarily, but like not being what you should be.
Yep. There's the should.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yep.
I'm more aware of how often I use the word should now lately too. Um, so while not purely a woman issue, I do think women are more prone to take on more than we should,
Mhm.
which obviously creates stress and leads to burnout. I think part of this is how we've been raised, like we've kind of discussed here. And we're raised to take care of others and not draw attention to ourselves in some ways. So, in fact, I was told it was a sin to do so
Mhm.
growing up. But I was raised in a very religious environment. And there were a lot of things that were sins that I look back on now and go, "Oh, I don't really think that was." So, based on your research, why do we as women have such a problem saying no to things that we don't want to do and asking for what we need from others as well?
Yeah. So it is essentially what you have said. It is that community based. It is things that we're raised with, things that we're taught. There was actually a research done on little girls and little boys, and they gave lemonade with salt in it for the little kids to drink. And the little boys would take a sip and just go and spit it out and be like, oh, that was disgusting. And the little girls would take a sip, look away, and then slowly drink the whole cup of salted lemonade. And the researchers would watch them, and then the researchers would kind of nudge them and be like, what do you think? And they're like, oh, it was okay. It was good. And then the researchers would push them and they would finally say, okay, yeah, it wasn't that good. And when they were asked, well, why did you drink it? Why didn't you just say something? They're like, well, I didn't want to hurt your feelings. Oh, it's not nice to say that. Oh, right. Like,
Yeah.
and that's exactly the problem. From a very young age, we are taught that as girls, we have to be nice. We can't hurt people's feelings. We have to put others first. And that gets so ingrained in us. It's kind of like what I mentioned about that practice for our whole lives. We are practicing being nice and putting others first and not being mean to others. And that just gets so stuck in us, it's our automatic response, right? And so it's
Yeah.
something that was taught to us. And what I always say to people, anything that we learned can be unlearned. And it's just about practicing and unlearning it. It's kind of like if you play a sport and you learned a bad habit of, how you shoot a ball or throw a ball or whatever, you can unlearn it. It takes work, but you can unlearn something and learn something new. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. You have to be very aware of it though too. And I think that's partly where your session was interesting because it pointed out things that I think most of the people in the room just hadn't really thought through necessarily.
Yes, yeah, and it's I always tell everyone the first step starts with awareness. It's always the first step. Like, how am I showing up? What am I doing? What's happening in my body? Because it happens so quickly, you're not even noticing it. I worked with a client on saying no just this morning, right? And she didn't even notice that her body, like right when she was even thinking about saying no to her body goes, and everything just tenses up. And it's so uncomfortable that she's like, yes. And that's her automatic response. And so it's teaching yourself to become aware of what is happening in my body and how do I slow it down so
Mhm.
that I have choice and I can pause in that moment when my body's doing the thing, pause, get myself centered before I go and respond.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Well, we can't get into your full presentation here, though. I think it would be great. And I do recommend that anybody who has an opportunity attend one in person. But for those listening, what are some of the first steps we can take to start setting boundaries and expressing our needs?
I would say a couple of things. One, know what your boundaries are. So a lot of people say, well, I'm struggling to uphold my boundaries. And I always ask, do you know what your boundaries are? Do you know what is in your boundaries, out of your boundaries, and what's that gray area? And for example, when it comes to like time and work, maybe it's what is in my boundary is I will work between 9 and 5, right? What is out of my boundaries? I will not work on evenings and not on weekends. And what is that gray area? Maybe on occasion, if there's like some major thing happening, then I might work for an hour in the evenings. But being very, very clear on like, what are my boundaries and defining those are important because most of us have never sat down to really define it, right? It's about the practice. So I encourage everyone to go on a no diet. And a no diet is essentially you get to choose, is it a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? How long will you be on this diet? And you tell everyone around you, your friends, your family, your coworkers, I'm going on a no diet, which essentially means when you come and ask me something, to do something, to go do something with you, whatever it is, my first response is no. And I can always come back and change my mind. But if you catch me saying yes, then you call me on it. And guess what? Friends, family, coworkers, they like to call us out on things, right? And why we're doing this is it's a practice. You're practicing saying no. My teacher had said it takes 300 times of intentional practice to build muscle memory, 3,000 times to embody it, to really turn it into habit where it's automatic. And
Mm.
so it's how do I like practice this intentionally? So going on a no diet helps you to get going on that. And I think the last piece is it's what we talked about. It's pausing, getting in touch with yourself, becoming aware of what is happening. And, expressing our needs is hard if we don't know what our needs are. So it's about pausing and asking myself, what do I need in this moment?
Yeah.
Right? What do I need? And for some of us, because we've been so out of touch with our own needs, that might be a very tough question. And so it's just pausing and getting in touch with your body and asking, like, what do I need right now?
No,
Right.
I think that's really valuable because I think I just got back from vacation. And I now I am in the whirlwind of going through all the emails and catching up on everything and, getting the mail started again and all these things that happen. And, as we're sitting here talking, I'm like, I don't stop enough to really ask what it is that I need right now.
Mhm.
And I think just that one action is probably a really good thing for all of us to do every once in a while to literally stop, put down the phone, turn off the TV and say, okay, what do I need?
Yeah.
And like you said, what are my boundaries? Because that's something else that I think we think about it maybe, or that, have an idea of what our boundaries are, but we've probably never fully vocalized them or defined them.
Yeah. And how will anybody else know what you need or what your boundaries are if you don't even know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
good question. Good answer. So since as you know, this is a podcast of the Accounting Move Project, and Move is focused on helping firms attract, retain, and promote women. What advice do you have for firm leaders on creating a culture where client needs are met, team members can support each other, and the firm has an environment where everyone can ask for what they need, be recognized for their contributions, but also be heard when they say no?
Love that. I think a couple of things. One is creating an environment where people can practice saying no, where they can practice asking for what they need and practice celebrating themselves. So another workshop I actually do is mastering the art of celebrating your wins because as women, we suck at doing that, right? And so it might look like, let's say you're having a team meeting. At the start of your team meeting, maybe what you do is you have every single person say, here's what I did that was amazing this week. So it's not recognizing someone else, but it's like, I'm telling you why I am awesome. And it is a practice of getting used to that because being able to speak your own virtues, being able to advocate for yourself means that you need to say, here's why I'm amazing. Right. And if everybody is doing it on their own, then it is a practice where everybody is doing it. And oftentimes women aren't given that space to speak or share, or they feel like they don't have that space. And so in this way, you're giving everyone an equal opportunity to take up space and to share and to speak up. Right. And it might even look like I used to run team summits. And at the start of it, I would say, what do you need for this summit to be meaningful and pleasant for you? Right. And we started off with that. And so everyone has an opportunity to speak. What do I need for it to be meaningful and pleasant? And it might look like, you know what, I got to head home to make dinner. And that would be really pleasant for me if we ended on time. Right. And so it's really creating that environment where leaders encourage people to speak up and give that space for people to speak up.
Yeah. I love that idea of like kind of patting yourself on the back a little bit because we all know people who do that a lot and they're in some cases kind of annoying. But when everybody is doing that, and we all have things that we're really good at that we shine at, and it's funny because I mentioned being raised in a really religious home. To me, that I can hear my mother basically say, "Oh, that's pride," and you shouldn't be prideful, but we have so many things that we're great at, and sharing that with others, I see that as a very positive thing.
Oh yeah. And I mean, I've heard people say things like, "Oh, I don't want to be arrogant and I don't want to be, whatever." And I'm like, it is not arrogance, it is confidence. It is confidence in knowing here's what I'm good at, here's what I'm not good at. Right?
Yeah.
Like for me, I suck at directions. My husband makes fun of me and says, "You get lost in our house." So I will never be like, "Oh, I'm amazing at this thing." It's just, that's the truth. And but I do know what I'm good at, I know what I'm not. And that's the difference between confidence and arrogance. Arrogance is masking insecurities.
Yeah.
And so what we're going for is the confidence. And there's been so much research that shows that when you celebrate yourself and your wins and what you're good at, it's good for your stress levels, it's good for your confidence, it's good for all of the things, physical health, right? And so why wouldn't we do it more?
Yeah. Yeah. And another outcome of that, particularly in a group environment like you're talking about, is we now know the strengths of everybody in the room.
Yep.
So we can put together teams that make more sense in some ways, or, say team up this person with this person because they're gonna like be able to serve a client better, or whatever that the goal you're trying to reach is. Yeah, I love that. I think
Yeah.
that's great. Well, I can't thank you enough for being here today, but I do want to end with some fun questions.
Mhm.
So when you were 5 years old or around that age, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a pediatrician. I loved kids. I was a kid myself, but I just loved kids. And I was like, I want to take care of them. I want to help them. And then I found out that you have to deal with cadavers and blood. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I just want to be the pediatrician that like helps kids feel better and give them stickers when they leave. I'm like, okay, never mind. So I changed my mind on that pretty quickly.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, science and math were the part of the reason why I didn't pursue a career like that myself. So it sounds like you've done a lot of traveling, but if you were given the chance to travel anywhere for free, you don't have to worry about commitments or anything like that, where would you go and why?
Antarctica. It is it is the only place that the only continent I haven't been to, and I love penguins. They are my favorite animal. So I would love to go to Antarctica and see penguins. And it's just been something that's I've dreamt of doing, and it's so expensive going to Antarctica. So if it's free, why not?
Yeah, that sounds cool. That is not necessarily on my bucket list, but now you kind of make me want to add it. So, and if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
It would be to be able to snap my fingers and just appear somewhere because I love to travel and I love to see the world, right? But that getting on an airplane and all that. So if I could just like snap and be like, I'm in Antarctica and play with the penguins and then snap and be home before my kids get home and I've got to cook dinner, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, I am 100% there with you. And I 3 days ago just flew back from Europe. So, and that's not even a really long flight, but that was long enough for me to say, oh. I
Yeah.
like being other places. The process of getting other places is not fun.
Yep. Yep. Wouldn't it be great if you just snap your finger, you're there, you do the toury thing, you snap, you come home and you're like back in your own bed?
I'm eating dinner at a Michelin star restaurant in Sorrento, and then yeah, I'm back in
Hmm.
my own bed. I'm
Yeah.
all in on that for sure. Well, thank you so much. I feel like I've learned so much in your session and then so much more today. I really appreciate you being here, Amy, and look forward to continuing to have conversations like this.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me again. It was such an honor and privilege, and it was so wonderful having you at the session at the conference.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you for listening to Move Like This, brought to you by the Accounting Move Project and sponsored by Moss Adams and Sapro. If you'd like to learn more, visit our website at accountingmoveproject.com. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends and colleagues too. I'm your host, Bonnie Buell Russick, and until next time, keep moving forward.